Open your Bibles, please, to Ruth chapter 1, verse 6. We ended last week with a woman named Naomi, which means, what does it mean? Anyone remember? I heard somebody say pleasant, so we'll go with that. It means pleasant. We ended last week with a woman named Naomi, her name that means pleasant, losing both her husband and her two married sons to death, along with any chance of grandchildren, all while stranded in a foreign country during a time of societal chaos and widespread famine. It's a catastrophe. Author Ann Kennedy sets the scene this way. 3 women stand bereft in a field. Death has stolen everything they have, everything they desired. Hope has gone down into the grave. No children, no grandchildren, no men to protect and provide for them. Childless, alone, forsaken. It's possible you're standing in that field today too. I don't know what your circumstances are. Your feet seem rooted to the ground. Waves of indecision roll over you. You feel forsaken and stuck. You need rescue in so many ways, maybe you've lost count. What should you do? Which way should you turn? Then you hear something that tips the scales, that gives you direction, that finally gets you moving. You hear about something God has done. And as bad as things are, it's the only hope of rescue you can see. It may only seem like a dim light on a dark horizon, but it's light. So you arise and you head in that direction. The book of Ruth, which is really a story about finding rescue, now continues by giving us the direction we're to expect rescue from. Look with me now at verses 6 and 7. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. The big idea of our text today is that the hope of rescue is always found in the direction of God's gracious visitation. Even, first of all, if return in that direction is lagging. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that Naomi didn't exactly head in the direction of rescue as soon as she could have, I don't think. Her departure seems delayed. Verse 6 begins with the word then. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. When? When? Was it after the death of Elimelech? No. When? Was it 10 years later after the death of her 2 sons? No, not then either. At least, apparently not immediately. When then? Only when she got a reminder of God's loyal love. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. Now this morning I don't want to paint too bleak a picture of Naomi. We need to be careful about assigning motives when the author doesn't explicitly give them, so I'm going to try to be cautious but fair as we evaluate what we see in today's text, because these were real people who really lived. But the truth is that everyone is a mixture of motives. Isn't that fair to say? Even on our best days, we have a mixture of motives for the things we do. I say that because we're going to see sides of Naomi that we might not expect to find in a Bible character. I mean, by now, we should probably expect to find just about anything in the character of a Bible story, but we may not expect this. Sides we'd expect more from someone in our own town, maybe, someone in our own church, maybe even sides we'd expect to find in ourselves, but maybe not in a Bible character. And so we also want to avoid what's called hagiography. Hagios means holy, so hagiography refers to a sort of idealized depiction of characters in a story, kind of a rewriting of history. It's very similar to what happens and I've seen it happen at many funerals where a person who was a jerk in real life is suddenly made out to be a saint after they're dead. I say all that because I read a lot of commentaries, or I read a lot of commentaries this week that made it sound as if all three of these women regularly walked on water, that they could do no wrong. I read a lot of commentaries that sort of painted it as if these women and the things that they're going to say in our text are all sunshine and light. But that's not going to be true if they're normal, sinful humans like us. And Naomi seems very human to me, because just like many of us, she seems sort of stuck in this moment of her life. She's got a reputation connected to her name. She's supposed to be the pleasant one, the happy one. There's always supposed to be a smile on her face, right? She's a follower of God, supposed to be a smile there. When someone asks her how she's doing, she's always the one that you would expect to answer by saying she's blessed by the best. She's also got all this head knowledge. In a moment, we'll hear her affirm some really deep theological truths. And so I'm sure in her head, she knows that the best thing, the most logical thing, the wisest thing would be to just go home to Israel. She probably knew it the moment her husband died. But she's made choices. She's made sacrifices. She's moved her whole family, she's moved her whole life to be in this place. She's got so much invested. It probably seems foolish to go back now so soon after arriving. Besides, she needs to be strong for the people around her. Then mix in a little pride. Maybe from the start, folks back home had warned them not to go to Moab. You'll be sorry, they said, and they were right. She is sorry. So she'll go back eventually, but she can't face them now. Maybe she can at least recoup some of her losses first. It'll help the smile feel more real if she can go back home with grandchildren at least. But then her sons die too. Suddenly, in an instant, all her male protectors are gone. And so, add to the mix of heartbreak and pride, fresh waves of grief and regret and fear. Why fear? Well, fear because now her options have shrunk down impossibly small. Aside from going home, she can now either sell herself into slavery to survive, she can resort to prostitution, or she can die. Except it's not just her now, is it? Now these girls are looking to her too. But there are complications with bringing them with her, and so she's paralyzed, she's stuck. But then she comes to herself when she hears a bit of news. For she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. She hears this news there in that far country, and she thinks, how many of my childhood friends have more than enough bread, but I perish with hunger? So she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. Notice really quick that Naomi starts off in verse 6 the same way we left her last week in verse 5. She's still nameless. Then she arose, the text says. One commentator calls her a non-person inching back toward personhood. Maybe you can relate. What did the news mean that the Lord had visited his people? What did that mean? Again, that word for Lord in your Bible should be in all caps, meaning it's God's personal name. It's the name Yahweh. Does that mean that the Lord visited his people? Does it mean Yahweh appeared in a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire back in Israel and rained down manna as in the days of Moses? No, that's not what it means. But it does mean that Yahweh took notice of Israel's situation and he took action. That verb translated visited, the Lord had visited his people. It has no direct English equivalent. It has the sense of God directing his attention to Israel, of him looking in on them and then looking after them by giving them food. And the way God seems to have done this is by sending the rains to end the famine. Finally, the crops could grow again and give them food. It assumed in the tidings, writes James Morrison, that the seasons and their products and all beneficent influences in nature belong to Yahweh. In other words, it's the doctrine of providence again that we talked about last week. It's the explicit assumption on the part of the author that God is actively involved in all created things and events in order to bring about his divine purposes. The rain may be the reason the people have food, but God is ultimately the reason behind the sending and the timing of the rain. In Jesus' day, writes one commentator, the miracle of the loaves was a sudden putting forth of God's bountiful hand from behind the veil of his ordinary providence. The miracle of the harvest in our story is the working of the same bountiful hand, only unseen, giving power to the living grains to drink the dew and imbibe the sunshine and appropriate the nourishment of the soil during the long, bright days. And so, the food has come because Yahweh had visited his people. Why would Yahweh do this? Why would God do this? The reason is given right there in the text, because the people of Israel are his people. Every Jewish person reading that, or in Naomi's case, hearing that, would know exactly what that possessive language pointed to. It pointed to a covenant relationship between Israel and God. It pointed to Yahweh's loyal love for those he was committed to and responsible for in a special way. This special way Yahweh was committed to Israel was called a covenant. A covenant relationship could be established between any two parties, really. But in the case of such a relationship between human beings and God, theologian Wayne Grudem describes it as an unchangeable, divinely imposed legal agreement between God and man that stipulates the conditions of their relationship. God tells people how he wants them to act and also makes promises about how he will act toward them. And if we had to sum up how God promises to act towards his people in the context of a covenant, no word better captures a summary of that action than the Hebrew word hesed. Hesed. We'll see that word again later several times in our story. Different Bible versions translate hesed in different ways, depending on what version you have. Loving kindness, mercy, covenant loyalty, compassion, steadfast love. Those are a few of the most common ways. For our series on Ruth, I'm just calling it God's loyal love. I'd say the closest thing we have to covenant relationships today is the covenant relationship between two people, a man and a woman, that we call marriage. Two parties make commitments to each other. We require things of each other. We make promises about how we'll act towards each other. And it's supposed to be more than a business arrangement. It's supposed to be more than an arrangement of expediency that can be dissolved at any point. It's supposed to be more than a partnership based on profit and loss. In fact, it's established with vows that explicitly state the relationship will remain fixed and permanent regardless of profit or loss, sickness or health, better outcomes or worse ones. And in a similar way to a covenant with God, if we had to sum up how each spouse promises to act toward the other in the context of this marital covenant, we'd have to say it's based on a special kind of loyal love. What do I mean when I say it's a special kind of loyal love? Well, let's put it this way. Is there a difference between the love and kindness I owe to a stranger and the love and kindness I owe to my wife? Well, I hope so. Is there a difference between the care and concern I owe to someone else's children and the care and concern I owe to my own children? Yes, in both cases, yes, there's a difference. Sure, I'm to show love to all people, but it's not equal. There's a duty of care. There's an order of loves in which some love and care is by nature and by commitment more special. It's more primary. It's more loyal. It takes precedence. It's meant to be above and beyond other loves in its responsibility. It's meant to go the extra mile in its duty and its action. And I think we all know this about the loyal love reserved for family. Likewise, I think Naomi knows it about the loyal love Yahweh reserves for his people. And this is what else I think. I think when she heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food, something stuck in her became unstuck. Something was shaken loose. I think God's gracious reminder of his personal loyal love broke through and softened some of the grief and despair and fear and pride lodged in Naomi's hurting heart. She knew she was part of that people, part of that family God was especially committed to helping. And I think that reminder of God's hesed, this clear demonstration of his loyal love, gave her hope of rescue too, however small. I think it was the last nudge she needed to finally get moving in the right direction. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. Sometimes progress means turning around. As C.S. Lewis put it, we all want progress, but if you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. In that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive, he says. But God knows in his mercy that we even need his loyal love sometimes to help us make those turnarounds. There's a song I grew up singing in Africa. I'm sure I remember it only because we all got to stand up and do hand motions together when we sang it. The chorus went like this, and I've shared this before. He's behind me. He is before me. He's all around me. Hallelujah. It's a song. It's a reminder that God's loyal love will never abandon one of his own. In his Spirit, he pursues us. In his Son, he makes a way for us to turn around. And all the while, he puts a light on and waits for us, watching to embrace us when we return home. God's people are surrounded by his loyal love. And so it's true that Naomi's return in the right direction has been lagging. It's been long delayed. But for the first time in our story, she's finally walking back to the right road. She's making progress because the hope of rescue is always found in the direction of God's gracious visitation. Again, it's possible you're standing in that field of indecision today too. Your feet seem rooted to the ground. Waves of uncertainty are rolling over you. You need rescue in more ways than you can count. What should you do? Which way should you turn? Well, if you're a Christian, it means you're one of God's people too. The Apostle Paul writes in Galatians chapter 6 that all who have trusted in Christ, God's Messiah, are considered the Israel of God. In Romans chapter 2, he makes it clear that a Jew is one inwardly, meaning it's by faith that anyone becomes one of God's people. So that by faith in the person and work of Jesus, we are grafted into Israel, as Paul puts it in Romans 11. What this means is that we're also included in the benefits of God's loyal covenant love. As we sang just this morning, our lives are wholly bound to his. And so hear this word today with Naomi and be reminded that there's still hope for you, that there's still rescue for you. Hear the word that Yahweh has visited his people in a little town called Bethlehem and given them food, the bread of life, and turn to him again in hope. Because in Jesus Christ, the true bread from heaven has come down to God's people to rescue them. He is able to satisfy every longing and to calm every fear. He is able to forgive every sin and comfort every sorrow, because he too suffered and on a cross has paid for your sins so that there is nothing left for you to fear if you will trust him. Whoever comes to him, the scripture says, shall not hunger, and whoever believes in him shall never thirst. And so wherever you're at, and however long you've delayed, that doesn't matter now. What matters is turning again to Jesus. Whatever you're going through, even if the circumstances were out of your control, that doesn't matter now. What matters is remembering God's loyal love that is proved to you in Jesus and turning to him. The hope of rescue is always found in the direction of God's gracious visitation. Even if the return in that direction is lagging, and now, second, even if the return in that direction is halting. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that at some point on this long journey home, Naomi seems to stop and change her mind about a few things. She left Moab in verse 7 with her 2 daughters-in-law, the text says, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But look with me now at verses 8 through 10. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." Depending on where they lived in Moab, there's really 2 likely routes that Naomi and her daughters-in-law could have taken to head back to Bethlehem. Both routes would have taken multiple days on foot. One route passed north, just around the top of the Dead Sea. There they would have crossed the Jordan River and headed for Jericho, where the road to Jerusalem ascended steeply for 17 to 20 miles. Once they hit Jerusalem, Bethlehem lay 6 miles further to the south. The second and shorter route would have taken them by way of the large peninsula called the Lishon, which juts out into the Dead Sea about halfway down. Apparently in the dry season, it allows travel by foot straight across into Israel, where they would have then made their way to Hebron before continuing north to Bethlehem. But now, somewhere along this road, and it's possible it was at the border between Moab and Judah on the northern route, or on the shores of the Lishon on the southern route, they've halted. Progress towards rescue has stopped. R. Hubbard Jr. says it's possible they've reached a spot that was understood to be a sort of point of no return. Back in Moab, we found Naomi standing in the fields. Now we find her standing at a crossroads. And there at the crossroads, Naomi starts to speak. "Go," she says to them, "return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me." Verse 9, "The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." She starts her little speech here with a double imperative, with 2 commands: go and return. It communicates a sense of urgency. What's the urgency all about? Well, it seems it's about the importance of finding rescue from their vulnerable situation by finding new husbands. It seems as though Naomi is trying to take the solution into her own hands. It seems as though she's trying to find rescue in her own way. "Return each of you to her mother's house," Naomi says. It's a little bit of a strange thing to say, because a woman who'd lost her husband was normally thought of as returning to her father's house at that point. The male headship, the covering, the protection of a husband being lost, a daughter would then revert to the former headship she'd been under, the covering or protection of her father's house. That's the normal procedure. But this isn't so strange when you remember the context. Remember, the specific urgency here in Naomi's mind isn't just the short-term protection of these daughters, but their long-term flourishing as well. It's rescue, not just in the form of temporary safety, but ultimately in the form of rest, a word that refers to settling down after wandering. In this case, a condition of security brought about by marriage. And so the belief of many commentators is that this reference of each of them returning to her mother's house is probably about them going to their mother's bedrooms, the place where marriages were traditionally arranged and planned in these cultures at this time. It's the same place, I found it interesting to read, it's the same place, I'd never noticed this, that Rebekah goes in Genesis chapter 24 after meeting Abraham's servant at the well and being given tokens of marriage sent by Isaac. Then the young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things, it says there. But we should pay special attention, I think, to what accompanies these commands to return to Moab, because it comes with a wish or a blessing or a prayer uttered by Naomi. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me, she says to them. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. There's a couple things here we should see. The first is what Naomi says, and the second is what Naomi doesn't say. Okay, so first what she says. What she says here is a prayer or a wish of blessing. That Yahweh, the God of Israel, would show them, two foreign women, his loyal covenant love by rescuing them through remarriage. Naomi's wish is that Yahweh would show Orpah and Ruth hesed. That's the Hebrew word kindly translates there. May the Lord deal kindly with you. Now, I think this would have been pretty astonishing to most Jewish readers to read this. As far as I could find, this formula of blessing, may Yahweh do with you hesed, or may Yahweh show you hesed, it's found in only, exactly like this, it's found in only two other places in the Old Testament. And in both cases, it's a blessing made from one Israelite to another Israelite. Even similar forms of this request in the Old Testament for God to show hesed to someone else, as when, in that same story about Rebekah, as when Abraham's servant prays that God will show hesed to Abraham by helping him, the servant, locate the right woman to marry Abraham's son Isaac. Even those instances and those requests for God to show his special, it's always for God to show his special loyal love to somebody who is already part of his covenant people. To those who love him and keep his commandments, as it says in Exodus. But not foreigners, not outsiders, at least not at this point in history. And so, as far as I can tell, there could be two things happening here. In the other places, the other two places where this same formula is used, it's sort of used for bringing about the formal end of a relationship. Sort of a breakup formula. In other words, it's a way of asking God to continue doing for someone what you can't do for them anymore because you're never going to see them again. And so, since Naomi will no longer be able to show this kind of special, loyal love to Orpah and Ruth, that's just part of being connected through marriage, family kind of love, this special, loyal love, she's asking God to keep showing that kind of love towards them for her. To the same degree that they've shown it to her and her boys all these years. It's kind of an astonishing prayer. And so some commentaries say that's the only significant thing about this, that this blessing formula signals the end of a relationship. That and the kisses she gives them, then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. Coming after those words initiated by Naomi, this kiss would have been understood as a kiss goodbye. It's a touching scene. And so they say this is just a goodbye scene. That's all that's significant about this. But while I do think this means and signifies a goodbye, I don't think that's all it means. I don't think it's the only significant thing about this, because again, I can't think of another place in the Bible other than a bit later in Psalm 117 where it talks about God's loving kindness, his hesed shown towards the nations, and later on in Jonah, where I can't think of any other places until way later where there's a prayer this clear made on behalf of foreigners. Which in my mind either means that Naomi sees these daughters-in-law as included under the umbrella of some of the covenant benefits of Israel because they married Israelite men, or that Naomi sees these daughters-in-law as at least being candidates to receive from Yahweh as much hesed or as much loyal love as they've shown to her and her family just on an earthly level, just on a humanly level. God reward them the same way they've blessed us, sort of thing. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me, she says. And so the first thing we should see is what Naomi says. I think it's an astonishing prayer. But the second thing we should see is what Naomi doesn't say. Because what you'll notice is that she doesn't say or wish in that, what she doesn't say or wish in that prayer is that Yahweh would deal kindly with them according to how he has dealt with her. Have you ever known something to be true in your head generally, but you weren't sure you really believe it applied to you? I mean, like, I don't know, what's a good example? I know one day I'll get old and I'll get sick, or both, and I'll die. I know that in my head. That's generally, I know that's true. But you know what? There's a part of me that deep down still struggles to believe that really applies to me. Yeah, I know. But it's hard. It's a struggle. It's a struggle. And in the same way, I think it's possible to know in your head that God is a God of loyal love, a God who will never leave you, a God who will never forsake his people, a God who takes notice of the circumstances of his people and then takes action to help them. I think it's possible to know all that to be true in your head generally, and yet deep down still not be sure you believe it really applies to you. Will God do that for you? And I think Naomi's start and stop return to Bethlehem reveals that same struggle going on in her heart. While news of God's gracious visitation gets rusted wheels squeaking again in the right direction, Naomi's had a lot of miles since then to think about all the hardship that she's been through. And it seems that with every step closer to home, that part of her that softened at the news of God's visitation is getting hard again. So that even in this prayer that reveals deep love for these two women, something else seems revealed as well. It's as if in what Naomi doesn't say, she's also making a veiled complaint against God, even a rebuke. At the heart of Naomi's poem, says Phyllis Tribble, are these female foreigners as models for Yahweh. They show the deity a more excellent way. What she's saying is that it's almost as if Naomi's prayer implies that God could learn a thing or two about Hesed from her daughters-in-law. Me and my dead, Naomi seems to say, have experienced more loyal love from them than we ever experienced from you. And so please deal with my daughters-in-law in that way, in accordance with their Hesed towards me, but not in accordance with your Hesed towards me. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me, she says. It feels like the kind of prayer you pray when you believe in God and you genuinely want him to help those you love, but you're still mad at him. Well, aside from her attitude towards God, what about Naomi's motives when it comes to trying to send these daughters-in-law away? Are they completely selfless motives? I think her farewell blessing does seem to be an act of true concern and love. I think she genuinely wants what's best for these women because she loves them. But it does seem like she is trying to take matters into her own hands. Like she's trying to regain some sort of control over her life, to fix what's broken herself. And I think that might include convincing herself that what would give her the best shot at a fresh start would be coming home with no baggage. J. Vernon McGee agrees. He thinks one reason Ruth doesn't want these Moabite women to come back with her is because it will reveal, what will it reveal? It will reveal the kinds of choices her family has made while away in a far country and the kinds of people they've become. In other words, he says, Naomi was trying to cover up her disobedience. Now, as I said last week, I'm not convinced her son's marrying these women was disobedience, but it certainly was an inconvenience. Right? Because who wants to explain themselves the moment they walk in the door at the end of a long journey and 10 years away, alone, without men, weary to the bone with grief, and all you have to show for your trouble is 2 foreign women? Who wants to immediately start answering those kinds of questions? Whatever the case, Naomi's first attempt to send her daughters-in-law home fails. And they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. In the words of R. Hubbard Jr., whether to repay Naomi's love, to remain loyal to their husbands, or to avoid the pain of parting, they declared their intention to sacrifice their futures on the altar of service to her. It's possible you are standing at a crossroads today too. You're stopped at a boundary. You're stopped at a point of no return. What should you do? Which way should you turn? Well, if you're a Christian, you need to stop stalling, is what you should do. Stop bargaining. Stop trying to control the narrative and find an angle that'll make you look better when you finally get back home. Stop trying to fix things yourself, to clean up your life before you turn to Jesus for help. You know what to do already. You know the way home. Just come as you are. The porch light is on for you. And what if you're not a Christian? You know, what if, like Orpah and Ruth, you've sort of just been swept along for the ride so far? Your family trusts in Jesus, or your friends maybe trust in Jesus, or whoever it was who invited you here to church today. And so here you sit in your chair at a crossroads. What should you do? Well, don't just leave with some tears and good feelings today. For goodness sakes, don't just go home with a story to tell. No, don't stay a visitor at the threshold of God's kingdom. Don't let this good fellowship upstairs or even the good food downstairs be the only bread you leave with today. Don't be satisfied with that. Don't be satisfied with a halfway send-off. Stay with us. Stay with us and learn more about the God of Israel. Journey with Jesus from this day forward all the way home. If you're not a Christian yet, here's my wish and prayer for you today. May Yahweh show to you His loyal love the same way He's shown His loyal love to me. My prayer is that you'll see Jesus today, whom the Bible calls the image of the invisible God. He has loved me with a love so loyal. He visited me and gave up His life to rescue me from sin and death and judgment. Our big idea today is that the hope of rescue is always found in the direction of God's gracious visitation. Even if the return in that direction is lagging, even if the return in that direction is halting, and now third, even if the return in that direction is revealing. Do you know one of God's favorite ways to purify you and draw you further in the direction of Jesus? Do you know it? I'll tell you what it is. It's by revealing you to yourself. He loves to do it. It's one of His favorite things. And God has built some major structures into creation order to make sure many people, most people, have this revealing experience. And one of those structures is marriage. Another is having children. Now, there are other structures He's built in as well, like friendships, like work relationships, but family especially has a way of stripping you of any fake godliness. You may look pretty calm and put together this morning, but you can't fool your husband. He watched you slowly unwind as you tried to dress the kids. You may look pretty pious and put together this morning, but you can't fool your wife. She sees the real you every day. She knows all the hurts, habits, and hang-ups you tucked away behind that smile on the way to church this morning. Likewise, you may talk a good talk with the other adults here this morning after church. Maybe downstairs you're talking theology and love Jesus this and love Jesus that and blessed by the best. You may even get up and preach a sermon, but you can't fool your kids. They hear you yell and complain the rest of the week, every day. They know what's really inside. And in the same way, I tell you, Naomi sounds pretty good and pretty put together in verses 8 and 9. She almost even sounds pleasant. But you can't fool God. He knows just the buttons to push to pull back the mask and reveal what's really going on beneath the surface. And He does it for your own good. He does it so you can drop the act and finally ask Him for rescue. So you'll give up stalling and posing and just come home. And so we see Naomi's mask start to slip in verses 11 through 14. But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way. For I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Let's first try to understand the case Naomi is making here before we look any deeper. In verse 11, Naomi says, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands?" There's no reason to go with me, she says first. I have no more sons to give you. She's telling them she can't have kids anymore. In other words, this is probably another way of saying she's already past menopause. And I'm sure they all knew that already, but she's making a point. And the way Naomi says it here injects the blunt fact with fresh sadness. It's said in a way that sort of reminds me of the last words of Nathan Hale, that American Revolutionary War spy. "My only regret," he said, "is that I have but one life to give for my country." Naomi's words are hauntingly similar. Her great regret is that she has no more sons to give her daughters-in-law so they might have husbands. It's really heartbreaking. "Turn back, my daughters," she repeats now in verse 12. "Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I could have children," she seems to be saying, "I'm still too old to even get a husband." And now, just to drive her point home, she strings together just a bunch of wild hypotheticals. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? So she's like, let's suppose I had some hope left, is how she starts. And that even this very night I should have a husband and have marital relations and should immediately conceive and have more children. Not just one, mind you, but two. And let's suppose further that both of them happen to be male. 2 sons. What luck! What then? Verse 13. Would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? Even then, Naomi says, would you still wait for them to grow up and then marry them? Would you really, really hold yourself back from marriage and all its benefits? The word translated refrain, would you refrain from marrying? It's a tricky word to translate because this is the only place it appears in the whole Bible. It seems to mean something like to hold back or to restrain. One pastor pointed out that it relates to another word that means an anchor or to be in prison. He says Naomi is essentially asking her mother-in-law, her daughters-in-law, would you shackle yourself to a ball and chain like me? I am nothing but an anchor. Many commentators think what Naomi is referring to with all this talk of other sons to replace her former sons as husbands for these women is the ancient custom in Israel called levirate marriage. A man who died without giving his wife children could still die in hope that his family name might go on because his brother could marry his wife and have a child for him so that there'd be a son to still bear his name and his inheritance. I know it sounds strange to us, but it was a law given by God to keep a family from going extinct. And so, hearing Naomi's words here, the Israelite reader might think back to the story of Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar. They might think back to how Tamar was essentially put in prison. She was made to wait by Judah because after his first two sons died while being married to her, he refused to give her the youngest brother in marriage, even after years of her waiting for him to grow up. And while Naomi may be referencing that old custom of marriage, you shouldn't think she's seriously proposing any of that here. In fact, I think she's making a mockery of that system. I think she's in her anger, in her bitterness, I think she's making fun of it. Levirate marriage was for grown brothers from the same father, not impossible unborn brothers born to a postmenopausal woman and a make-up husband. So that in the end, it just comes out sounding like another roundabout critique of God for failing to provide rescue. Not just for Naomi, but for Orpah and Ruth too. Would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? Look now at the second half of verse 13. No, my daughters, Naomi finally says. She's answering her own questions now. No, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Here's another way of translating that first part of her answer. For I am in far more bitter straits than you are, she says, even though both young women before her, standing before her, are also widows without children. But it's the second thing that she says here that really tips her hand about the state of her heart. The hand of the Lord has gone out against me, she says. Her words sound like those found in Lamentations chapter 1. Look and see if there is any sorrow like my sorrow, which was brought upon me, which the Lord inflicted on the day of his fierce anger. I mean, she's in a bad way here. Now, is it true that according to the doctrine of providence, God is continually involved with all created things in such a way that he directs them to fulfill his purposes? Yes. And so, let's give credit where credit is due. Naomi at least understands rightly that God's hand has been irresistibly involved in directing whatsoever has come to pass in her life. To say the hand of Yahweh is involved in everything is good theology. That's good theology. God is involved in all created things and events in order to bring about his divine purposes. So far, so good. But here's the real question. What are God's divine purposes for Naomi? And in her answer here, we see her troubled heart revealed because why? She believes God's purposes for her are sinister. We know that because to express God's opposition to something, instead of just talking generally about the hand of Yahweh this or the hand of Yahweh that, the common expression was to add against to that formula. So you'd say, the hand of Yahweh is against, and then you'd fill in the blank with the name of whatever enemy you were talking about. And what does Naomi say? The hand of the Lord has gone out against me. In other words, in Naomi's eyes, Yahweh has attacked her as an enemy. The problem is that Naomi has flattened God out into a one-dimensional deity and made herself judge over him. I'm sure we never do that. If she feels bad, it's because he's bad. If she can't see the good in what he's doing, then it must not be good. If she can't figure out why his work in her life, what it's been all about, then his work in her life must be an attack. If he doesn't do things the way she expects, he must be against her. But God is bigger than that. As Timothy Keller once said, just because you can't see or imagine a good reason why God might allow something to happen doesn't mean there can't be one. So what's the tragedy here? I think it's that God has not attacked her at all. It's that God is not out to get her at all. God is not out to hurt her. The steadfast reality is that he's out to show her his loyal love. And she can't see it yet. He's out to show her his hesed as one of his people. The problem is she just doesn't believe it yet. And so this last part of her argument is basically that since God is against her, Orpah and Ruth being too close to her is just going to result in collateral damage in their lives too. So don't come with me. What does all this reveal about Naomi? Well, the first thing it reveals, as we've said, is that she's not sure she still believes in a God who loves to do gracious, impossible things for his people. At this point, she's almost completely without hope. And so, if you're a seeker-sensitive church growth kind of person, Naomi is breaking all the rules here. Other than her farewell prayer, which is starting to feel more and more like a formality the farther away we get from it, she's basically doing everything in her power to discourage these two women from coming with her and becoming God's people. She's saying nothing but unflattering, untrue things about God. Can you imagine coming to the front door this morning of the church and John Thatcher is waiting there to greet you? I told you I was going to pick on you. And John Thatcher is waiting there to meet you, but instead of welcoming you, he tries to scare you off. He's standing there with the programs, and you reach for one, and he pulls it back, and he says, "Why would you come here? You're really better off going somewhere else. Why would you come here? The God we serve here is vindictive and mean and kind of powerless too." The second thing I think this reveals about Naomi is that she's started thinking a lot about herself. And that happens when you stop trusting God. The more you look away from him, the more you will look to yourself. It's just how it works. I owe a lot to Pastor Bill Giovanetti for his sermon series on the book of Ruth. One of his helpful observations is the self-centeredness revealed in Naomi's arguments here. Speaking of her trying to take matters into her own hands and fix things herself, he says, when you try to solve the problems of the fall by human effort, you inevitably become self-centered. And that's what we see as we look back over her argument here and look ahead to what she's still yet to say. We see self-judgment, self-loathing, self-absorption, and self-pity. Listen again to her questions. Why should you go with me if there's no hope for a future? Why should you shackle yourselves to me if there's no hope of husbands? Why should you risk everything for me if God's hand is against me? I mean, there's a lot of me's and I's in there. Here's a great antidote to self-centeredness that I need to be reminded of often. Maybe it'll help you too. It's a quote from the Scottish pastor Robert Murray McShane. For every look at yourself, he says, take 10 looks at Christ. For every look at yourself, take 10 looks at Christ. Let's look at verse 14, where we catch a first glimpse of things revealed about Orpah and Ruth as well. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Orpah finally relents under the onslaught of Naomi's arguments. She goes back home. We know it's her initiating the goodbye, that it's her saying goodbye this time, because instead of Naomi initiating the farewell kiss, Orpah does it. But what does Ruth do? Well, against all odds, despite Naomi's self-centeredness, self-absorption, and self-pity, our text says Ruth clung to her. The word that translates clung to her there, it's the same Hebrew word found in Genesis 2:24 for what a man is to do with a woman he's to marry. He's to hold fast to her. It's a word that conveys a deep commitment. It's a statement of commitment. It's a word that conveys a special, loyal love. Here you sit in your chair at a crossroads. What should you do? Well, if you're a coffee snob, don't let the bad coffee here scare you off from our church. If you're an introvert, don't let our greeting time scare you off. If you're a football fan, don't let our long services scare you off, or our conservative theology scare you off, or anything else. Don't even let our greeter scare you off. No, my request to you is please look beyond our many flaws and see the good God we love. Please look beyond our many flaws and see the good God who first loved us, who loved train wrecks like us with such loyal love that instead of scrapping it and starting over with someone else, He patiently visits us in Jesus Christ and works with us in His Spirit to repeatedly show us our weaknesses and to remind us of His goodness so that we might increasingly turn to Him and seek His help instead of trying to solve our problems ourselves. So stay with us and don't turn back. Cling to Jesus and don't turn back so that the Lord might show you the same loyal love He's shown us.